Right, so we're now getting sort of quite a lot of control over the way that our pages are laid out. I think it's time to sort of revisit this idea of responsiveness. So you remember from the previous module that we said responsive means that the web page changes the way it looks depending on how wide the browser window is that someone's using to view it. So if they're on a device that has a very narrow screen, then we need to change the layout in order to make it usable on that screen. And if they've got a wider screen, then we've got more space to play with, and we can do things like have more elaborate navigation systems and that kind of thing. So I'm just going to show you the sort of a simple example of how we can make a page respond to the width of the browser, just so you get the idea of how we can implement responsiveness. Because in the following lessons, we're actually going to use a ready-made responsive library called Bootstrap. It makes it a lot easier to deal with this. But for now, let's just sort of get the basic concept of how responsiveness can be implemented in CSS with something called media queries. So here I have a simple web page with just that just displays some text. And if we look at the code, it looks like this. So we've got our HTML tag, and inside that we've got a head tag and then a body tag. And you'll see that in the head tag, I'm linking to an external style sheet. And in the body tag, I'm just displaying some text. And the external style sheet is currently empty. So let's just sort of change the background color of the body just to remind ourselves how to do that. So body tag has a background of green. Okay, save that. And if I reload, as we expect, the background goes green. However, let's say I only want it to go green if they're on a wide screen. Well, this is where the CSS media query comes in. And it looks like this. So it says @media, which, if you like, is notifying, say, well, I'm now going to specify sort of different activities depending on some property of the browser. Okay, so we can think of media as referring to the kind of the browser properties. Okay, and let's say I want to say if the width is at least 1,000 pixels, then I want you to set the body background color to green. Okay, so that what I've done is I've effectively kind of created another layer within my CSS. So I'm saying it's not just in every scenario the body becomes green. It's only when the browser window has a minimum width of 1,000 pixels. And this little test that we're doing here, this little test, there's all kinds of different things we can test there. And so if you want to find out more, I encourage you to go and sort of Google the CSS media query and find out different kind of tests you can do. But we're just doing the basic thing of testing whether the screen is at least 1,000 pixels wide. Okay, back to the page. Okay, so I reload the page, you can see it's now gone white. And as I drag the width of the browser window out, eventually you can see I hit 1,000 pixels in width and it goes green. And indeed, I can specify other things, right? So I can take that, copy, paste, and say, okay, so when we hit, say, 500 pixels, I want you to go red. Right, so that means if the browser window gets to at least 500 pixels, it will go red, and if it gets to at least 1,000, it will go green. And so there we are. So let's go right down to narrow window, and you see it's white, and I widen it. When I hit 500, it goes red, and when I hit 1,000, it's going green. And I'm not really programming any complex code there to do that with the JavaScript, for example, that you'll see next time. I'm just using the built-in features of CSS, which allow me to do this. And I'm just going to go one step further and show you how you can actually manipulate layout depending on the width of the window. So we saw briefly before how we can kind of use the margins and things like that to control the layout. Well, let's just do something a bit more interesting just to finish off this lesson so you can see how we can get towards making more responsive layouts. What I want to do here is actually define a new class, which is going to be, so let's just make that 750. So we'll say at 750 pixels, we want something to happen, and at 1,000 pixels, we want something else to happen. So at 750, what I'm going to do is I want to just say, well, I'm going to have two columns in my display, right? So let's start off by just doing that. And so if I do this, div like that, column 1, and then do another column and call it column 2, and just reload. You can see, let's get rid of that green stuff. Okay, so it says column 1, column 2, but they're not actually columns yet. And the idea is that when it's a really wide window, I actually want 2 columns, and when it slims down, I'm going to drop them into a single column. So at the moment, they're always in a single column, regardless of the size of the window. And so if I just set a class on this, I can then, now I've got a class, I can connect different CSS properties to that class depending on the size of the window. So I jump over here, and what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say if the screen is at least 750 pixels wide, I want to redefine what responsive does, and so what we'll do is set the display to this, and I'll set the width to say 400 pixels. Okay, can you see there's 2 columns appearing there? And then I can finally say, well, let's say we want 2 narrow columns. If we're in a sort of 7 up to, if it's at least 750 wide, then we want 2 narrow columns. If it's at least 1,000, we can have 2 wider columns. Okay, so I'm saying that depending on the size of the window, I'm going to change the column layout. And there we go. So let's just see as I go really big. Oh, I've set it to 5,000. That's why it's not working. If I go really wide, you can see it jumps out to another layout there, because it's making the columns wider. And to make it really kind of clear, I can just set a border on these. Okay, just so I can see exactly what the columns look like. Okay, so you can see that as the size of the window increases, suddenly it's kind of changing the way that my text is going to lay out. Right, so that's just a sort of brief introduction to how to do the most basic sort of form of a responsive design. And in the next lessons, as I say, we're going to look at the Bootstrap library, which makes it sort of much easier to do this in a really sort of smart way that's aware of all the sort of standard kind of sizes of device that people use. Okay.